Today's video is going to be brought to you by Skillshare. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is TAETRO. I'm your electronic music mentor. Today, I want to make a video about all the ways I've been using samples in my beat making. In a lot of cases, I'm creating tracks entirely from samples. Not just talking about using loops or grabbing parts of other people's songs or whatnot, actually taking samples and making full-on instruments out of them. There's a number of different ways you can work with samples, not only in your production, but in your performances. And today I'm going to be breaking down for you some of the ways I do that in my production and my performances. Now, before we get too deep into it, let me tell you about the sponsor for today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives, where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. They have thousands of inspiring classes that can help you learn a lot of the fundamentals of some of the things we're going to be talking about in this video, including classes in music production, music theory in Ableton Live, even video production and photography. Normally, Skillshare Premium is just under $10 a month, but for the first 1,000 of my subscribers who use the link down in the description, you'll be able to get yourself a free trial of Skillshare Premium, which with Skillshare Premium, you actually get access to all of the classes on Skillshare. In this tutorial I'm going to be doing today, there might be some gaps in your knowledge of what you need to learn about Ableton Live or what you need to learn about music theory, and what's cool about that is Skillshare has a whole class for this. It's music theory taught by an Ableton certified trainer within the context of Ableton Live. It can't get much better than that. And if you're a little bit more advanced, one class that I've taken and I've used to improve my mixes is the Learn to Mix Your Music class with Young Guru. It's really good for those of you who have lots of music that you're ready to release, but you want to get it up to a professional quality sound. So use the link down in the description. The first 1,000 people to use it will get a free Skillshare Premium membership. For now, let's get into all the different ways we can use samples to make music. All right, so the way I want to show you how I work with samples is by showing you some beat videos that I've made and then opening up the projects and showing you the different ways that I'm using samples within those projects. So the first beat I want you to hear I made with the Artiphon Orba and one single sample pack. I'll tell you which one it was after the video. Okay, so that's our first beat, and not only was that beat made entirely with samples, but it was also made with a single sample pack, the Oliver Power Tools sample pack from Splice. And if you don't know, actually all month you can get one free month of Splice using my code TAETRO100, and you can use my link in the description for that, so you can even follow along and use these samples if you wanted. But let me break down for you the different ways I used samples in this particular project. And the first way I want to show you is with the very first sound that you hear, the very first sample. And it also ties right into my first tip when talking about how to work with samples. So as you're browsing through your sample library, deciding what to use, don't just listen to what the samples sound like out of the box. Think about what you can do with the sample. For instance, the first sample I used in this beat sounds like this out of the box. This is very EDM sounding almost, but the way that it sounds in my track is like this. This is a totally different vibe. It's almost like a lo-fi kind of vibe. And the way I achieve that is by putting it into Ableton Live's Simpler, which allows me to sample things. It's like a simple sampler. But let's hear what it sounds like, just in that Simpler. That's not quite right. That's not what we heard. And one way I'm transforming this sample is by using the plugin Halftime, which a lot of producers use. It does exactly what the title says. It takes your samples or your sounds and puts them into halftime, meaning it's stretching the sample, which results in lower pitch, a different rhythm than the initial sample, all that good stuff. So I go from having a sample that might sound like this to instead having a nice lo-fi sounding sample like this. So, that's my first tip there. Don't just listen for how the samples sound out of the box. Think of all the tools you have at your disposal to really transform those samples. See beyond the initial sound of the sample. We'll stick with this beat for one more way to work with samples. It's one of the main ways I work with samples, and it basically just amounts to creating your own instruments using samples. A lot of sample packs contain what are called one-shots. One-shots usually means a single note from a particular instrument. This is really useful to us if we use a sampler or simpler in Ableton Live, because we can throw that single note into simpler, we can warp it, and then the notes will be uniform across the scale. So for instance here, we've created a really nice sounding electric bass instrument using a single one-shot sample. And it's just as simple as throwing that sample into a sampler like Ableton Live's Simpler, making sure it's warped, because if it's not warped, the timing will change across the different pitches. And you can't really tell. In other samples, that will be more of a problem, but if you're creating any kind of sample instrument, you do want to warp the sample so that it maintains the same length across all the pitches. So I didn't need a fancy plugin or virtual instrument or anything for that. I have now what I think I will reuse in multiple tracks is like a really good picked electric bass sample instrument. All right, that's enough with just this one particular project. Let's dive into a new beat, and I'll talk about some other ways you can use samples. Check out the video. Okay, so for this particular session, I was using my MIDI fighter. Let's go ahead and switch to that controller. All right, I've got my MIDI fighter here, and the one thing I like about it is the limitation of having just these 16 pads available to me. And if we look at the screen, this track is not even being used, nor is this one, nor is this one. We are using one single track in this video, and this is a way of working with samples and setting up live sessions that I've really come to enjoy, working in limitations of 16 pads. So if you use the drum rack beyond its normal use, we think of drum rack as containing drums. But it can obviously contain so much more than that. So there, obviously, we're putting in some melodic type samples that basically become the basis for this beat here. So drum rack is not just meant for drums. You can take a sample and throw it on any of the little boxes in drum rack, and then you have full control over that sample. So as you can see here, our initial sample, I just wanted that nice initial chord, and then I wanted to pair it with apart from the same sample, but I wanted them on different pads, right? So what I do is I drop the same sample on each pad, and then I use these little flags here to go ahead and basically crop them and make them individual pads. So now I can bounce between these two chords as I see fit. Same with this one. This one is more of a typical one shot. You know, we talked about that before, a single note. And then this one is the same one shot, but if you notice, it's pitched down. Look at this transpose knob here. We're down 9 semitones, so we can get a little more out of every sample if we mess with the pitch. What's important about working with samples this way is when you have instruments or samples like this that have nice long tails, but are on separate pads and play the same role, you don't want them overlapping each other. It can get really, really messy. So we want to put them into the same choke group, meaning that when I play one pad from the same choke group, it'll cut off the previous sound. And the way we do that, it's actually like a little bit hidden in Ableton Live. This is what your drum rack will pretty much look like by default with these little buttons here, gray buttons. If we click this one in the center here, and then normally this will be off, we will get this new set of buttons. We click I/O, and we get this whole sort of menu here where we can do different things with the samples, including, look at that choke column here. We can adjust the choke group. So you'll notice that they are each assigned a number. As long as they are in the same number choke group, it will work the way I described. The samples in the same choke group cut each other off. They will not overlap. Triggering a new sample in that group will cut the old one off and start the new one. You can see that. My top row here, they are all completely in channel 16. And let's take a look at the vocal samples. They are also in the same choke group, well, a different choke group, but together they are in the same choke group for the vocal samples because this one is super long. And that one is super short. Sometimes I want it to cut off the long one. It's a really cool way of working with samples, and it's crucial if you don't want your mix to get messy with these samples working together like that. To bring it back from the previous project, I actually used that same bass sample one-shot technique in this kit. So I'm using those same bass samples here. The initial samples are from a kit called Autumn Bliss by Soul Surplus. If you're looking for some really cool, like vibey, lo-fi kind of samples, that's a good kit to check out as well with your free month of Splice. All right, let's move on to our third and final beat, and I will show you a few more ways you can make tracks entirely with samples. Okay, so I made this beat with the push 2 and a bunch of different samples. And one initial thing I want to talk about here is how simple, again, this project is. Of course, these are only all like minute-long beats because I'm making them for daily Beattober videos, but they don't need many more elements to really make them complete. They actually just basically need some arranging and maybe add a B section in with some of the same sounds. But this beat is super simple, yet it still sounds full. And each one of these instruments was created using a sample. So I don't think there's any shame in using loops. In fact, I'm using 2 different loops that I did not create. I just pulled right from the sample pack. So the first one being this really nice percussion loop. I use percussion loops a lot, especially tops and hi-hats. I think people get weirded out about using samples, but as long as they're supplementing your original idea, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I also rarely do this, but I used a vocal loop as well. it just went really well with my musical idea, my beat that I was coming up with, so I decided to include it. Now around that, I used samples in a couple different ways. Of course, I used them for drums. It's one of the basic ways. I usually love putting a vocal shout in my drum kits. Just one of my go-tos. And then I used Simpler once again to take a vocal sample that was once a very, very long vocal sample. Let me stretch these flags out. That's very long. That would be very tough to play as an instrument. But again, we have control here where we can kind of shorten that up a bit. And I'm not just using this single vocal one-shot swell to play a single note. I'm actually using it to play chords. So you see, I get this really nice vocal swell pad sound from a single sample. No fancy VSTs or instruments here, just a single vocal one-shot swell. Also, the way I work with 808s, I do it based on a sample. So another sample I've gotten from Splice for my 808, that has become my main 808 instrument. And in this sampler here, so now this is the upgraded version of Ableton Live's Simpler. This is the proper sampler. You get a bit more control here. As you can see, you'll get a bunch more tabs here if you want to go deep and get complex with it. One of the ways I'm using it here is I actually added glide to the sample, because if you hear these 808s, you notice it doesn't attack that second note if I continue holding the previous note. It's because it's gliding between them. That is something we can do in the pitch / oscillator tab. And right down here, we can turn the glide from on to glide, and then we can change the time. Obviously, increasing the time will give you a much more dramatic glide. And sometimes people prefer having no glide at all. For my 808s, sometimes I enjoy a little bit of glide. But again, don't need a fancy VST instrument here, can do it all with sampling if you find the right sample. That is to say, I do use some effects, but as you can see on this 808, I basically am only using a stock Ableton pedal. I have my basic audio processing rack, which I have a whole video on how you can make that yourself. But yeah, then I'm using pedal to add some overdrive to the sound, which if I crank that up, you'll really hear it, but I keep it dialed back. So it's just like a little hint of spice there. And those are the many different ways that I work with samples to create full tracks. I know a lot of people are super into synthesis, so working with different synths and crafting different sounds. For me, I've just always been drawn to the sampling approach. Browsing through sample libraries, figuring out how I can transform these sounds. It's almost like taking different puzzle pieces from separate puzzles and making a brand new picture with them. I don't know, that's kind of how I think about it. And I highly encourage you to start working with samples and try some of these approaches and take advantage of the 1 month free of Splice Sounds 100. You basically get 100 sample credits a month, I believe, from Splice. And if you use the code TAETRO100, you can get that free month. The link is in the description, along with our link to Skillshare. So the first 1,000 people to use that link in the description can get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. With all that, I think you will be set up for success and you will be able to create your own tracks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out the rest of the channel for more tutorials, especially if you want to hone in on certain aspects. I have videos on all these different controllers and how to set up my basic audio processing rack, how I made that 808. All that good stuff is here on the channel, so make sure you subscribe, like the video because the engagement helps, and leave a comment if you have any further questions that you think I can answer. But for now, take advantage of the free Splice membership, the free Skillshare trial, and enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.